Hello and welcome to my EPQ presentation on the creation and writing of a tragedy stage play. You may be wondering, what is my project? For my project, I decided to create and develop and write my own tragedy stage play with the characters, plot, narrative and many other dramatic devices and effects being created by myself and editing myself, which I've also accompanied with an evaluative 2,000-word essay at the end of the project and an accompanying artefact form written fully and developed and edited by myself of my tragedy stage play. Some aims and objectives I chose for this project, with the main branching one being the creation, development, writing of a tragedy stage play, which I subsequently named The Coldness of Daylight. For some mini objectives of long-term objectives I came up with was to research and develop the conventions of tragedy and get a full understanding of how tragedy works, the conventions, features that are needed in the creation of a tragedy stage play. And another aim of mine was to learn and fully develop Harvard referencing, which is an essential necessity for university courses, which I would like to learn later in my life, but by learning it through the EPQ project, I can further prepare myself for my university life with thesis and many other essay subjects being important with this form of referencing. Another thing I wanted to learn was also just learn the idea and the playwriting strategies and theories behind playwriting, which would be essential for playwriting as a whole, which is an idea of mine for a career path further in life. And it also allows me to look at not just the creative side, with another aim of mine being learning about the industry as a whole, about how the stage directions work, about how the job system works, which would allow me to understand playwriting as well from a productive side and a practical side. Some initial ideas and inspirations I came up with mine was the reason why I chose the EPQ as a whole was because it allowed me to learn essay style of writing, which I couldn't learn in other parts of my English, which would be extremely helpful for my possible university courses later in life. With this topic of creative writing being chosen for my project because it allowed me to have a free understanding and research creative writing as a whole, with creative writing being a possible course I could do at university to learn and develop my understanding of creative writing. And also, the reason why I chose playwriting is because it's an essential part of the English literature course at university, with an entire unit based on it, with this allowing me to fully understand and prepare the actual criticism which I'll be able to research through playwriting strategies, which I'll research later on, which allows me to understand, while also allowing me to understand the creative side and the ways these actual plays were written, created and edited. While also I chose this project while the reason I chose tragedy as my main focus of my project was mainly because unlike comedy, which is surfaced in base and simple language devices and stuff and comedic effect, I decided to go with the tragedy because it allows me to freely learn and explain and deeper meanings in my work as a whole. Well, when I moved on to the next phase of research and resources, I came across the researching in my findings of learning the tragedy as a genre, as a whole, learning how it works in convenience, which will allow me to get a full grasp of my tragedy stage play, to show that the plot is competent and the characters are understandable. One of the resources I came across was Aristotle's Poetics, with Aristotle's Poetics leading me to understand the basic elements, functions of tragedy stage play, which have not changed for hundreds of years. One of the ways that I learned this was, for example, Aristotle suggests 6 main elements of tragedy as a plot, with plot, character, thought, diction, song and spectacle being the respective 6 elements of playwriting. In many ways, I thought this was a very useful and valid form of learning it, because it allowed me to understand the basic functions, elements and basic format of creating creating tragedy stage play, which allowed me to have a simple plan and structure assessed of all my work, which allowed me to later on develop this further. While some problems with this form was that it was extremely outdated, which did not affect many of the modern techniques such as lighting equipment and stage devices and staging as a whole being further across, with many other forms of tragedy being developed later on in that time, which did not benefit my project as a whole. But Aristotle's Poetics did allow me to further understand my understanding of the English literature course, which I might do later in life. Then I moved on to my basic learning of the playwriting strategies for tragedy, which was in order to get a full grasp of not just the career, the production, but the creative side of playwriting. With one of the ones I came across was a practical guide by Greg, who suggested that playwriting should be more practical and be more productive in the way it's written, because that is the main way that we fully learn and develop our understanding of playwriting. In many ways, I do think this was a very, very useful asset to my project, with the practical questions and approaches that he teaches being essential for my project, which I use some of these as myself in the early stages to create and develop my own characters. Whilst Pra, who was the writer of Playwriting for Dummies, suggests a completely different form. They focus on the idea of building tension and dramatic conflictions in your piece, because they say conflictions leads to interesting drama, which I do think this has some essential points, with the focus on dramatic tension being essential as a whole to the project of creative writing. I did think there were some main problems which didn't suit my tragedy stage play development as a whole. With the too much focus on tension, meaning that dramatic devices and lighting, staging were left out of the production as a whole, with the less pragmatic side, meaning that it was more like reading a textbook than fully developing my understanding of creative writing, restricting my freedom in a way, which is why I think overall that Greg's practical guide is probably the more useful form for my project as a whole, heavily influencing my project. And moving on to development and realisation, initially for the plot development, I went with the idea of a dramatic monologue, a simple dramatic 30-minute monologue, which allowed me to evaluate one character's thoughts and processes. But I came across to a conclusion with this by saying that I thought that it was too simple and didn't allow me to fully challenge myself enough for my project, which didn't allow me to develop my writing skills enough or the editing process as a whole. So I moved on to this by creating some character sheets, such as this, about my three main characters, William, Jack and Felix, and to show their basic attributes, their conflictions, their tensions, with the tension being another focus that I learned from Perra, which was very useful in my project. But with this being heavily inspired by another playwright by the name of Sam Smiley, who also furthered the idea of planning and management being the most important factor in playwriting. While some of the benefits of this character sheet, which I've already outlined, I also had to change the original plan of my project, because originally I went with an hour-long dramatic monologue, but I changed this because I knew this was not going to work to challenge my understanding or my power enough about learning how to do tragedy as a genre. So I changed it to 30 minutes instead of the hour-long one, and for a more realistic and eligible form of presenting my project. There were some issues and flaws in my plot development, which I am going to discuss further, with one of them being, in my plot development, one of the management strategies that did not work was my sketchy storyboards, which did not help or evaluate or plan or organise my plot in a productive and essential way, which I think was detrimental to my plot as a whole, with the elongated nature of these storyboards, making them unclear and ambiguous stage directions, which did not benefit or help me understand the movement of the characters which I initially wanted to portray in my work. If I were to do this project again, I think that I would use digital forms on Word or Excel to create my project of my storyboards, so that I could plan these further and maybe ask a friend who knows how to draw to show a visual medium of how to present the project. Well, after the plot development stage, I moved on to the writing process, the most essential part, in which I initially started to draft the stage directions and the structure of my plot and of my tragedy stage play. I have changed this because it seemed to be too long and outdrawn at the 30-minute mark, because the 5-act structure would not fit in a 30-minute mark, because my scene-by-scene structure, which I later adopted, helped a lot more and showed a constant flow rather than the act structure, which is built for 2-hour-long plays, which would not have benefited or been helpful in my process. Some of the problems which I'd like to discuss was, like I've said before, would be the non-literal and metaphorical stage directions. With one of the main example would be the chilling cold stare of traumatic nostalgia, which I thought was something that did not fit with the practical and stage-based aspect of my play, which I was originally trying to portray, with these stage directions leading to many problems later on with teachers' understandings of the project, which if I were to do the project again, I would like to change this. And then I moved on to the final section of the writing process, being the editing and rereading. Well, during the final stages of this artefact, with the artefact and the accompanied essay, I went back and edited and rewrote some of the many grammatical errors and incorrections in my project to make it seem more professional through this, making it seem like a proper and valid playwriting piece. Well, I also, later on, to get a further understanding of the stage directions, in the post-production of the play, I created my own preface to describe the staging and sound design and lighting of the project, which was another issue that I had to change because I was lacking in those factors despite my research not being vivid enough. And the way that I evaluated my external review is that I created my own mark scheme with four sections being the main point of it, with dramatic devices, narrative, language, and overall enjoyment being out of 30, with these being AO1, AO2, and AO3. Likewise, with the overall point grade, like I said, being measured as a grade in a way, so I could make it seem more like a professional written government piece to make it seem more productive and easier for the reviewer to understand. So for this, I asked one of my members of my neighbourhood called Mr. John Manson to evaluate who already works in the drama industry and has reviewed many plays before in his career. Subsequently, the results that I wrote in was some prose that he suggested, because he said that he enjoyed it overall, and he said one of the prose he suggested that he proposed was the idea that he said that he thought the characterization and development was very well written. He thought that the plot as a whole and the structure was competent and it worked well for the story I was portraying. But he did say that for my project, the ending was a bit too anticlimactic, meaning that I needed to develop and further go back and reread it and re-edit it to make it a bit more satisfying. Well, he also said that the stage directions were still too vague and still too vague for my project, and I needed to work on that and further it if I wanted to get higher in the marks we might created. And he said there was not enough focus on not enough breaking of scenes in my project, because he thought that it did translate well from page to page, but there needed to be a more furthered structure than my original thing to develop it even further. From this project, I've learned many useful, beneficial things, such as Harvard referencing being one of the skills I've learned, which will allow me later in life to have a further and greater understanding of academic and university creation. Also, it allowed me to learn the idea of referencing, and not just referencing, but the creation of an appendix and bibliography, which helped greatly in my production, with one of the organisation strategies which I think was extremely useful being the EBQ Gantt charts which allowed me to organise and process all my work into a collective and understandable weekly organisation strategy, which I believe was very, very useful in my overall project, allowing me to set time allocated tasks to make sure that I was reaching my projects by the end of the project. Some strengths and weaknesses of my Wiki project was I would believe that the overall quality of my data analysis of my playwriting strategy has been very useful. I created my own source critics table which allowed me to fully understand the usefulness and grade the ability of each playwriting strategy, which was extremely useful. So there were some productive management strategies which I think were extremely useful for my project, with character sheets being one of those, for example, which if I were to do the project again, I would still use due to their effectiveness at organising and planning my overall project. But some weaknesses would be the overall stage direction of my artefact was still too vague by the end of the project, and they did not fit with the literal and realistic dialogue of my play. So if I were to do it again, I would change this and go with more literal and less metaphorical stage directions to further improve my project. Well, another strength that I've also suggested would be not just the source critics table, but the Gantt chart, which I further illustrated in the last slide, was a very, very useful device in my management strategies, which if I were to do the project again, I would still use. I do believe though that one of the weaknesses that was detrimental to my project was I did not do enough research into stage directions and sound design in my project, which I think would be extremely useful in the project, with lighting being another aspect which I think I could have developed further in my resourcing and sources part of the process. And there were a few small errors in my external evaluation, which if I were to do the project again, I would not just do a mark scheme, but I would do a written report by the external reviewer so that I could learn and produce my work at a better quality and standard. And if I were to do this differently, if I were to do it again, one of the things I would do is I plan, like I said before, more literal stage directions, which would be extremely useful for the project. I would have also changed the smart-based target system, which was detrimental to the overall success of my project, which if I were to do it again, I would just use my Gantt chart and tell weekly allocated tasks which I could complete in a necessary and productive format, which would have been extremely useful to my project and would allow me later on in life to use my own Gantt chart to fully develop my understanding, which would be extremely useful for university life. And like I said, if I were to do it again, I would probably research the ideas and functions and conventions of lighting design in my project. In summary, I believe that my project was overall fairly successful, with a few issues and flaws leading it to not reach the originally planned idea that I went with the overall success of it, I believe, being competent at the very least, with, like I said before, the stage directions and lighting research not being developed enough for me to further my understanding of the project. But I have learned many useful skills such as Harvard referencing, which was extremely useful in my project. And to conclude, I think that my project was overall successful in the creation and development of a tragedy stage play. Any questions?